I've been recreating and transforming various builds recently, from YouTubers to my own subscribers, but this time I thought I would transform one of my own. My name is Oskip, and today I'm going to be transforming my first ever build. This cathedral was my first upload on this channel. I initially built and uploaded it to the channel 6 years ago, so with everything that I've learned over the past few years, I wanted to see how far I could push this build. Of course, I was a smart boy back in the day, and I don't have the world save anymore. So instead, I had to do the same thing that I always do with these transformation builds, and start by recreating it. I chose this birch forest as a good place to begin, and cut out a large area of the terrain and flattened it out. I then blended the edges of it to match the natural terrain, and once that was done, I began building. Rebuilding this cathedral was a strange process, as I had to rewatch the original video and retrace my steps when building, which gave me a weird sense of nostalgia and deja vu. I started with the front section of the building, working from the same process as the original video. Luckily, because this building was symmetrical, I was able to spend my time building one side of the cathedral, and then by using World Edit, mirror it to the other side to save some building time. Now that I have more experience and techniques in building, it was bizarre working in my old style and seeing how I've developed throughout the years. Although there may be some of you watching this and thinking that this is a decent build, there are actually a lot of things that I can see wrong with it in my building style today. For starters, the cathedral has a 2-block centre, and although this isn't the worst thing in the world, it restricts some possibilities in the build and leaves the design features such as the large windows at the front and the back with a wider gap down the middle. Another fault is that there is too many flat sections to the build and not enough depth and variation. You can see this specifically in the flat balconies, some of the walls and the roof. It really needs some variation in the materials to help break up the colour as well as add some variation to the design. Lastly, the two biggest sore spots of the build for me. The first of which is that the building is just sat on completely flat grass. I did this deliberately to mimic the design of the original build, as that also just sat on flat grass without any terrain editing. And trust me, it makes a huge difference. The second sore spot is that the build is completely empty and it has no interior, which leaves the cathedral feeling empty and half finished. With all that being said though, I think it's a relatively decent build for some of my earlier work, so how about we show it off properly with a little cinematic. And with that, 6 years on, I've rebuilt my first ever Minecraft build. Now, let's give it a makeover, shall we? Before doing anything, I laid down a line of different materials I was considering using for this project. My goal was to try and incorporate some different blocks into the build that I wouldn't initially go for. In the end, I picked out stone, andesite walls, stone brick, and light grey concrete. I started with the entrance, making a large doorway and surrounding it with stripped windows. I included the large wooden door, and then played around with a few different block types. I then moved on and began working on the main tower design. The plan was to make one tower that I could then mirror and copy around to the different sections of the cathedral. I spent quite a while working on the design and getting it right. I knew that this was going to be larger than the old cathedral, so I wanted to ensure that things stayed relatively in proportion. I was also going for quite a gothic style cathedral this time, so the design choice is quite different from the original. I continued these large strip windows all the way up the tower, and at the very top, began working on these large crenellations. Finally, I capped it off with an extremely peaked roof, added a few details, and with that, the tower design was complete. Once mirrored over to the other side, I continued to build up the middle section and add a large circular window. Using andesite walls, I was able to create this pattern that would then sit in front of the glass, filled in the window, and then began working on the top section that included the beginning of the main roof. I added another circular window with a similar design, and then started adding these metal spikes that lined the rooftops. I finished copying the design of the tower around to unfinished areas, and pulled back the original cathedral further so that I could begin working on the side. Before doing that, however, I wanted to change up the windows and add in a variation of stained glass panes, similar to what you might find in an actual cathedral. Now, from the side view, I wanted to add in these miniature tower supports that arch over and into the building. This was a great way to break up the flat wall design that I had on the old cathedral. Halfway down, I created a separate level and capped it off with a roof. I pretty much mimicked the same design I initially made at the front of the cathedral, with a few alterations, and once done, I copied and pasted it along to create the side of the building. Before finishing, I copied the two front towers to the back of the building and left it to edit further later on. So, to avoid a completely symmetrical building, and to keep things interesting, I decided to make a little outcropping from the side of the building and add in a custom section to the building with a cylindrical tower at the end. It has similar design features to match the rest of the cathedral, except I thought it would be fun to try out a different style of roof that featured a small tower atop of it. I quickly section out and lay down a large smooth stone platform before realising that I was going to keep that for the interior of the cathedral floor. Instead, I trim away at it and continue the terraforming, bringing the landscape toward the cathedral further, having it blend in with the landscape and appear more natural. Once done, I changed it all to grass blocks and then began painting walking paths of gravel and sand across the terrain that fed off in all different directions. I then covered the area in grass, and down next to the cathedral, began creating a custom birch tree. I then copy and pasted this custom tree a few times around the building, and then tried to add in more default birch trees into the mix that gradually dispersed nearer the building. Now, it was time to clean up the interior and do some work. I started by creating these pillars along the main body of the cathedral that would support the upper section of the building. I also added them up against the wall to act as extra support, and along each of the windows created wooden roof sections and a banister beneath made up of anvils. Adding in another pillar to hold up the walkways and different levels, I started cleaning up and sectioning off different tiers of the towers and linking them to the main building. I also added stone archways atop the pillars that would help support the roof of the building. And then once that was done, I copied the design over to the other side of the building. I then came to the back of the cathedral where I made steps to a raised area. I edited the wall behind and created a massive stained glass window that reached from the top to the bottom of the hall, mimicking the same design and pattern that I used on the previous large windows. Finally, I started adding rows of wooden benches and began lighting up the area with lanterns hanging from the walkways and embedded in the pillars. Lastly, out the front of the building, I added in this neat little fountain feature, and then slowly but surely added cobblestone walls along each of the pathways. Anyway, let's get on with the cinematic. And that wraps up this build. Thanks everyone for watching and sticking around to the end. I spent quite a while finishing this one off and I'm really pleased with the result. It's honestly crazy to see the differences of how different my building style is now in comparison. If you're watching this video and you're still not subscribed, then I urge you to press that beautiful red button down below. I've got plenty of other builds lined up and I only intend to make them better and better. As always, if you want to download this or any of my other builds, then you can do so by finding them on my Patreon. There's a link for that down below in the description, and also a link to my Discord if you fancy sharing your own Minecraft builds with others, or if you just fancy a chat with other community members. I hope that you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.